shouldn't have come here.
Hey, stop it! Get away from her!
Left for death on the road, until a billionaire stopped. She was lying on the road, barely breathing.
Broken.
Bleeding. Forgotten. Moments earlier, hands meant to serve had beaten her instead. Not strangers, people who owned her time, her body, her silence. They thought she was dead enough. They dumped her like rubbish and drove away.
No witnesses. No consequences.
She was never meant to be found. But one car slowed down. A man who never stopped for anyone stopped. A billionaire. A man used to power, not mercy. A man who could have looked away like everyone else did. He didn't know her name. Didn't know her story. Didn't know that helping her would unleash secrets powerful people wanted buried. All he knew was this. If he drove past, she would die. And if he stopped, nothing would ever be the same again. Because that night didn't just save a life. It exposed cruelty, awakened justice, and rewrote destinies forever. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ocean of Tales. Kindly watch, comment, and subscribe on this channel. We'll be grateful if you help us do this. We will be notifying you when we drop a new video. Don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Before we move to the main story, if today is your first time of watching our video, please subscribe. Cold night air pressed down on the road as a body lay twisted near the gutter, half on gravel, half on cracked asphalt, where streetlights flickered like tired eyes that refused to look too closely. The smell of oil and damp dust hung thick, mixing with iron from blood already drying too fast. Nia's chest rose unevenly, each breath a fight, each exhale thinner than the last. Traffic hummed far away, indifferent, the city of Lagos breathing loudly while she struggled to breathe at all. Her fingers twitched once, scraping the road as if it could answer back, as if the ground could explain why she had been left there. A dog barked somewhere, behind a fence. A bus roared past, without slowing. Headlights skimmed her shape and slid away, leaving her again in darkness. The night did not rush. It waited. And with every passing second, the question grew heavier. How long could a human body survive when the world had already decided it was done? Pain flared suddenly, sharp enough to drag her halfway back from the edge, and for a brief moment, sensation returned in cruel fragments, burning skin, throbbing ribs, the taste of dirt and blood coating her tongue. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, catching only the blur of light and shadow. She tried to move her legs. Nothing answered. Panic surged, quick and animal, then faded into exhaustion just as fast. Somewhere deep inside, instinct screamed that staying awake mattered, that sleep meant surrender. But the road was cold, and the dark felt thick, almost comforting. Her cheek pressed harder against the asphalt, and the world tilted. In the distance, laughter spilled from a bar, careless and loud, as if joy itself had taken a detour to avoid her. She wondered, not clearly but enough, whether anyone would notice if she stopped breathing right here. Whether her name would matter when morning came. Whether this place would remember her at all. A gust of wind rattled loose paper and pushed it against her arm, the sound loud in the silence, startling her heart into a frantic stutter. The paper stuck to her skin, damp with blood, and she tried to brush it away, but could only manage a weak shudder. Her mind drifted, slipping between now and before, between the road and the house she cleaned every day. Faces flashed without order. Orders.
Shouting.
The sudden weight of hands. She tried to focus on something solid, counting breaths, counting heartbeats, but numbers dissolved before they could settle. Somewhere above her, a streetlight flickered and died, plunging her into deeper shadow. The darkness felt intentional, like a final decision being made without her consent. If this was how it ended, she thought dimly, it felt too quiet, too small, and that thought, sharp with unfairness, refused to let go. Tires hissed briefly on wet pavement, close enough to send vibrations through the ground, and hope sparked, sudden and dangerous. Nia tried to lift her head. Her neck screamed in protest, and the effort collapsed into a groan that barely reached her own ears. Headlights slowed just enough to outline her shape, just enough to confirm what the driver already suspected was trouble. The car did not stop. The lights moved on, washing the road ahead instead, leaving her behind like a mistake erased. Something inside her cracked then, not loudly, not all at once, but enough to change the way the darkness felt. Hope became heavier than fear. Each passing vehicle carved that lesson deeper. People saw, and people chose not to know. The city wasn't blind. It was busy. And that choice to keep moving felt more final than the blows that had put her there. Her breathing turned shallow, ragged, each inhale scraping like sandpaper, and the edges of her vision began to blur. Sounds stretched and warped, melting together into a low, distant hum. She thought of water, cool, clean water running over her hands in the mornings before the house woke up. She thought of sunlight through the kitchen window she was never allowed to open. These memories drifted in uninvited, soft and cruel, as if reminding her of a life that no longer belonged to her. The road felt harder now, less forgiving, pressing its truth into her bones. Somewhere inside, a small, stubborn part of her resisted, clinging to breath out of sheer defiance. She didn't want her last moment to be this, faceless, wordless, uncounted. But the night did not negotiate, and the darkness crept closer with every blink. A low engine note cut through the quiet, different from the rest, smoother, steadier, approaching without the usual rush. The sound grew, then softened, tires rolling slower than expected. Light spilled across the road again, brighter this time, lingering where others had fled. The beam caught her hand, then her face, then the dark stains spreading beneath her. The car did not pass. It idled. Somewhere behind the windshield, someone was looking. Nia felt the weight of that attention even before she could process it, a pressure that pulled her half a breath back from slipping away. She wanted to move, to signal, to prove she was still alive, but her body refused. The engine stayed on. The light stayed fixed. And for the first time since she hit the ground, the night hesitated. The car door did not open immediately, and in that pause, everything balanced on a knife edge. Inside the vehicle sat Ethan Cole, a man used to schedules and certainties, staring at something that did not fit neatly into either. He had slowed without knowing why, instinct cutting through habit, and now the consequence of that instinct lay bleeding in front of him. The city around them continued as usual, music, horns, distant voices, but here, on this small stretch of road, time felt suspended. If he drove on, the world would keep spinning exactly as before. If he stepped out, nothing would stay the same. Nia's chest hitched again, shallow and uneven, as if answering the unspoken question hanging in the air. And in that moment, before any door opened, before any choice was made, her life depended on whether hesitation would turn into action or disappear like every other passing light. Morning always reached the house before Nia did, sliding through tall glass windows and settling gently on polished floors that never remembered her footprints. She woke before the sun, every day, long before alarms rang in other rooms, moving quietly so her existence wouldn't feel like an inconvenience. Cold water splashed her face in the narrow servant's bathroom, and she stared at her reflection just long enough to remind herself she was still there.
No llueli.
No mirrors meant for lingering. Just a borrowed towel and a borrowed space. By the time the house stirred awake, breakfast smells already filled the air, plates arranged perfectly, as if by magic. No one asked how early she rose. No one wondered how tired her body felt. They only noticed when something wasn't done. And each morning ended the same way, with Nia tying her apron tight, bracing herself for a day where being invisible was the safest way to survive. The kitchen became her world, loud with orders and silent with appreciation, a place where heat clung to her skin and time moved in rigid blocks of duty. She cooked meals she was never invited to sit and eat, tasting only scraps standing over the sink while the rest of the house laughed in the dining room. When plates returned half-finished, She scraped them clean without complaint, hunger becoming a familiar background noise. Her hands moved constantly, washing, chopping, wiping, until they ached, skin roughened by soap and neglect. She learned the rhythms of the house better than anyone, when tempers flared, when smiles were fake, when silence meant danger. Every movement was careful, measured, designed to avoid drawing attention. Because attention in that house rarely came with kindness. And yet, with every meal prepared, she wondered how long a person could give without ever being seen. Upstairs, the bedrooms held a different kind of quiet, thick with rules that were never written down but always enforced. She cleaned rooms filled with expensive furniture she wasn't allowed to sit on, straightened beds she was never meant to rest in. Her eyes caught glimpses of lives she did not belong to, family photos, perfume bottles, neatly folded clothes that smelled of comfort and choice. Sometimes she paused, just for a second, imagining what it felt like to wake up in a room like that, without fear of being called by name in anger. But those moments were dangerous. Dreams had a way of softening focus, and softness was punished. So she worked faster, wiped harder, erased every trace of herself before anyone noticed she'd been there. The house stayed spotless. Her heart grew tired. And still, she told herself this was better than nothing. Outside, the compound walls rose high, sealing her life into a narrow routine, separating her from the city that pulsed just beyond reach. She heard Lagos through muffled sounds, traffic, vendors, distant laughter, like a radio turned too low to understand. On errands, she watched other women her age walk freely, phones in hand, choosing where to go next. Their laughter followed them like music, and each time it did, something twisted inside her chest. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't careless. She had dreams once, small ones, practical ones, but they had been quietly folded away under the weight of survival. In this house, ambition looked like disobedience. Hope looked like ingratitude. And so Nia learned to keep her eyes down, her voice low, her future undefined. But the question she never asked out loud kept growing louder. Was this really all her life was meant to be? Publicly, the family spoke of her with practiced warmth, calling her our help, with smiles that suggested generosity. Visitors were told she was treated well, that she was lucky, that she should be grateful. Nia nodded along, eyes lowered, playing the role expected of her. Gratitude, she learned, was not a feeling, it was a performance. Behind closed doors, tone shifted. Instructions sharpened. Mistakes, real or imagined, became excuses. The same hands that gestured kindly in public tightened in private. She learned to read moods like weather, to sense storms before they broke. Every day became a careful negotiation, a balance between doing enough and not doing too much. And still, no matter how perfectly she moved, she remained replaceable. That knowledge sat heavy in her chest, even on days when nothing went wrong. At night, when the house finally slept, silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the hum of generators and the distant city. Nia lay on her thin mattress, body aching, staring at the ceiling as if answers might appear there. She thought of her mother's voice from long ago, telling her to endure, telling her that patience was strength. She repeated those words like a prayer, even when patience felt more like surrender. Sleep came in fragments, shallow and restless, filled with dreams that never quite finished. Each morning pulled her back into the same cycle, the same unspoken understanding that she belonged to the house only as long as she caused no trouble. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet resistance remained, a sense that being treated as nothing did not make her nothing at all. The day everything changed began like any other, with routine motions and practiced silence, nothing to warn her of what waited ahead. She tied her apron, stepped into the kitchen, and began working through tasks she could perform without thinking. The house felt tense that morning, like air before a storm, but tension had become normal. She told herself to move carefully, to say little, to finish quickly. She had no idea that by nightfall, the walls she cleaned would turn against her. That the life she endured would soon demand a price far greater than patience. And as she wiped the counter one last time, unaware of the eyes already narrowing, one question hovered unanswered. How fragile was the thin line keeping cruelty from becoming something far worse? Laughter filled the living room that afternoon, light and rehearsed, drifting through open doors as visitors settled into soft chairs and admired the house. Nia moved between them quietly, carrying trays, lowering her eyes, absorbing smiles that never reached anyone's gaze for long. Compliments floated around her like decorations, about the home, the hospitality, the good help. Each word landed without weight, because she knew they were not meant for her. She watched hands gesture warmly, voices soften, and faces glow with a kindness that seemed effortless. From the outside, it looked like harmony. From where she stood, it felt like a stage. And when the guests finally left, the air shifted instantly, as if the house itself exhaled and dropped the mask it had been wearing. The first command came sharp and unnecessary, slicing through the quiet with a tone that carried warning more than instruction. Nia responded immediately, heart tightening as she moved faster, careful not to miss a step. A plate clinked too loudly against the counter. A door closed a second too slow. Small things, always small things, were noticed now, collected like evidence. The smiles vanished. Voices hardened. The same people who praised her moments earlier now spoke, as if she were a problem that needed correcting. Nia felt it before she fully understood it, the familiar tightening in her chest, the sense that today required more caution than usual. She lowered her head further, hoping obedience would pass unnoticed, unaware that obedience was no longer enough. A hand landed on her arm without warning, fingers gripping harder than necessary, turning her toward a face that no longer pretended to be kind. The touch burned, not just with pain, but with humiliation. Nia froze, breath caught, eyes fixed on the floor as words rained down, each one stripping away a little more dignity. Accusations followed, vague and unprovable, delivered with certainty. She wanted to explain, to clarify, to defend herself, but experience had taught her that explanations only made things worse. Silence was safer. Silence was survival. Yet in that moment, silence felt like an invitation for anger, for control, for something darker waiting just beneath the surface. The house seemed to close in as voices rose, echoing off polished walls that had witnessed this shift many times before. Orders turned into insults, insults sharpened into threats. Nia felt herself shrinking inward, trying to take up less space, trying to disappear in plain sight. The power imbalance was no longer subtle. It stood tall and unashamed, reminding her exactly where she belonged. Every glance carried judgment. Every pause carried menace. She noticed how quickly empathy evaporated when no one was watching, how easily authority slipped into cruelty. And with every passing second, the distance between control and violence grew thinner, stretched tight like a rope about to snap. Fear crept through her body in waves, cold and steady, settling deep in her bones. Her hands trembled as she continued working, movements automatic, mind racing. She had seen this pattern before, the tightening, the escalation, the unspoken permission that came with unchecked power. The house was quiet now, too quiet, the kind of silence that listens. Nia felt watched even when no one spoke, felt judged by every breath she took. She wondered what mistake she had made, even though she knew the answer didn't matter. In this house, guilt was assigned, not earned. And today, for reasons she couldn't name, she had been chosen. A sudden shove broke the fragile balance, sending her stumbling against the counter, pain flaring through her side. The shock stole her breath, more from disbelief than impact. This was no longer correction. It was release. The line had been crossed, and everyone in the room felt it, even if no one acknowledged it out loud. Nia straightened slowly, dizzy, eyes still lowered, heart pounding so loud, she feared it could be heard. She sensed it then, the shift from controlled cruelty to something reckless, something that did not plan to stop. And with that realization came a terrifying truth. What happened next would not be accidental. As the tension thickened, the house held its breath, waiting for the next move, the next excuse, the next act. Nia stood there, fragile and exposed, knowing that the kindness shown to visitors moments earlier would not return to save her. Whatever protection existed outside these walls did not apply here. The smiles were gone. The witnesses were gone. Only power remained, unchecked and impatient. And as the first blow landed, not yet the worst, but close enough. One question burned through her fear, unanswered and urgent. How far would they go now that no one was watching? Darkness settled early that evening, heavy and suffocating, pressing against the house, as if it knew what was coming. The generator hummed outside, steady and loud, masking smaller sounds that might have traveled too far. Nia moved through the kitchen again, slower now, every muscle sore, every nerve alert. The air felt charged, thick with something unresolved. No one spoke to her directly anymore. Instructions were tossed like scraps, eyes cold, patience gone. She sensed it in the way doors closed harder than usual, in the way footsteps followed her movements too closely. This wasn't discipline. It was build-up. And somewhere between wiping the counter and rinsing her hands, she realized the house had already decided she was guilty of something, of anything, and punishment was no longer about correction. A single accusation cracked the silence, sharp and careless, thrown like a match into dry grass. It didn't matter that it made no sense. It didn't matter that there was no proof.
The words were enough. Faces hardened instantly, anger flaring as if it had been waiting for permission. Nia's heart raced as she shook her head, trying to understand, trying to follow the logic that wasn't there. She felt the room tilt, reality slipping as voices overlapped, each louder than the last. The accusation grew with every repetition, feeding itself, transforming irritation into certainty. In that moment, truth stopped being relevant. Power had chosen its story. And she was standing alone inside it. The first blow came fast, fueled by frustration rather than aim, knocking the air from her lungs and bending her forward. Pain exploded across her back, hot and blinding, stealing her balance. She stumbled, catching herself against the table, gasping. Shock froze her more than the impact. This was not how punishment usually looked. This was something else, raw, uncontrolled. Another hit followed, then another, each one louder, heavier, angrier than the last. She tried to protect herself, arms raised weakly, vision blurring as tears spilled without sound. The room spun, walls melting into streaks of color. Somewhere, a voice shouted for her to stay still. As if stillness could save her now. Fear tipped into panic as restraint vanished completely, replaced by rage that no longer checked itself. Hands shoved her to the floor. Her head struck tile, sending a sharp flash of light through her skull. The taste of blood filled her mouth. She curled instinctively, trying to disappear, but blows rained down anyway, indiscriminate, relentless. Each impact echoed through her body, pain stacking on pain until it became impossible to separate one from the next. In that chaos, a terrifying clarity cut through. This was no longer about teaching a lesson. This was about release. About using her as an outlet for something far older and far uglier. Time fractured into uneven pieces, moments stretching too long, others vanishing entirely. Nia lost track of how many times she tried to breathe deeply and failed, how many times her body jolted under impact. Sounds grew distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. She focused on staying conscious, clinging to the rhythm of her heartbeat, afraid that letting go would mean never coming back. Somewhere in the noise, she sensed hesitation, a brief pause, a sudden awareness creeping in. Someone noticed how still she'd gone. How quiet. How wrong this was becoming. The room fell abruptly silent, broken only by harsh breathing and the low hum of electricity. Nia lay motionless on the floor, limbs heavy, chest barely rising. Blood pooled beneath her, dark against the pale tiles. The shift in energy was immediate. Anger drained, replaced by fear. Not for her, but for themselves. Eyes darted. Voices dropped. What had been rage turned into calculation in a heartbeat. Someone knelt, shook her once, too hard, then again. No response. That was when the truth landed, cold and undeniable. This had gone too far. Panic took over where cruelty left off, loud and desperate, filling the space with frantic movement. Plans formed quickly, selfishly, with one goal: to make the problem disappear. Nia did not hear them. She did not see the way faces twisted with fear of consequence. She floated somewhere between consciousness and darkness, unaware that her life was now being weighed against convenience. As she was lifted from the floor, her body limp and unresisting, the question that mattered most hung unanswered in the air: were they about to save her, or make sure she never woke up again? Night swallowed the compound as the gate slid open with a low metallic groan, the sound sharp against the hush that followed. Nia's body was dragged across concrete, skin scraping, limbs loose in a way that didn't look human anymore. The air smelled of fuel and damp earth, the kind of smell that clung to clothes and memory. No one spoke her name. No one checked her pulse. The urgency wasn't about saving her, it was about speed. A trunk popped open. The darkness inside yawned wide. Hands that had struck her now handled her carefully, not out of care, but calculation. The city lights beyond the wall flickered like distant witnesses that would never testify. And as the trunk slammed shut, sealing her inside the heat and silence, the question pressed harder than the lid: how quickly could a life be erased if everyone agreed to look away? The car lurched forward, tires crunching gravel, then humming smooth on asphalt, carrying its secret through sleeping streets. Inside the trunk, air grew thin, metallic, tasting like rust and fear. Nia drifted in and out, awareness flashing like broken bulbs, movement, noise, then nothing. Each turn jolted her body, pain blooming in delayed waves, then receding into numbness. Outside, Legos passed by in fragments, neon signs, late-night vendors, the glow of generators. Life everywhere. None of it reaching her. The city did not slow. It never does. And with every kilometer, the distance between her and help stretched thinner, more fragile, like a thread pulled tight enough to snap. The road they chose lay quiet and forgotten, a narrow strip where streetlights skipped long shadows and potholes pooled with dark water. The engine cut. Silence rushed in, thick and absolute. The trunk opened again, light spilling briefly onto her face, revealing blood, bruises, a body that looked finished. For a heartbeat, someone hesitated long enough to feel the weight of what they were about to do. Then practicality won. She was lifted, dragged, and dumped near the gutter with a careless shove, her head turning to the side as if the road itself rejected her. No blanket. No apology. Just distance. The car door closed. The engine restarted. And as taillights shrank into nothing, the night reclaimed her without comment. Rain began to fall in thin, needling drops, tapping against metal and stone, cooling the heat trapped in her skin. Water traced lines through blood on the asphalt, diluting evidence, blurring the truth. Nia's chest rose once, then stalled, then rose again, shallow, stubborn. Her body lay at an angle that felt wrong, bones protesting even in stillness. The road vibrated occasionally as vehicles passed somewhere nearby, their presence announced but never arriving. The rain grew heavier, soaking her clothes, chilling her core. Each breath sounded smaller than the last. The night had been handed a decision, and it seemed content to wait for the outcome. Minutes stretched into something crueler than time, measured by flickering lights and distant horns that never came closer. A stray cat paused near her feet, sniffed, then darted away. Wind rattled loose plastic against a fence, a hollow rhythm that echoed too loud in the emptiness. Nia's thoughts thinned, slipping through cracks she couldn't seal. She tried to remember warmth, sun on skin, steam from a pot. But the cold pressed in, relentless. The road felt vast now, indifferent, a place where mistakes were left to settle. And with each fading breath, the idea that she had been discarded like trash tightened its grip, daring the world to prove otherwise. A pair of headlights appeared far down the road, small at first, then brighter, then steady. Hope stirred, fragile and dangerous, like a spark near spilled fuel. Nia's fingers twitched, barely, scratching grit. Her throat tightened around a sound that never fully formed. The lights slowed, then swerved around a pothole, drawing closer than the others had. The beam swept across the gutter and caught her outline, an arm, a face, the dark spill beneath her. The car did not speed up. It did not vanish. It hesitated. And in that hesitation, the night seemed to lean in, curious. The engine softened to a purr as the vehicle rolled to a stop, rain ticking against its hood like a countdown. Inside, someone sat still, watching the shape on the road that did not belong there. The city continued its distant hum, unaware that a decision was forming in the quiet. If the car moved on, the rain would finish what the beating started. If it stayed, consequences would follow, questions, exposure, responsibility. Nia's chest hitched again, a thin, stubborn breath that refused to quit. And as the headlights remained fixed on her battered body, one unanswered question hung heavy in the air. Would this stop become salvation, or just another pause before the end? Rain streaked across the windshield as the car idled, its engine low and controlled, the kind of sound that spoke of money, maintenance, and certainty. Inside sat Ethan Cole, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the shape illuminated ahead. He was used to roads like this, late nights, empty stretches, calculated routes between meetings and deals, but this moment did not belong to any schedule. The figure on the asphalt disrupted something deeper than his drive. It didn't make sense. People didn't just lie on roads like discarded objects, not without a story attached. He felt irritation first, then caution, then something quieter and more dangerous, responsibility. His foot hovered over the accelerator, muscle memory urging him forward. Stopping meant delay. Delay meant questions. And Ethan Cole had built his life on never letting unnecessary questions slow him down.
His phone vibrated softly against the console, glowing with missed calls and alerts, reminders of a world that expected constant motion. Contracts waited. Decisions waited. People waited. He had spent years mastering the art of efficiency, learning how to move through problems without letting them touch him. This, whatever this was, did not fit. Through the glass, rainwater pooled around the body's outline, making it look smaller, more fragile, more real. He told himself someone else would stop. Someone better equipped. Someone closer. The city was full of people, but the road remained empty. The logic he trusted so deeply began to feel thin, stretched against the simple fact that no one else was coming. Ethan shifted in his seat, tension creeping into his shoulders, eyes narrowing as he studied the scene again. The posture was wrong. The stillness was wrong. This wasn't drunken carelessness or a staged accident. This was damage. Deliberate. He'd seen enough in his life. Boardroom battles, hostile takeovers, silent wars fought with paperwork, to recognize when harm had been inflicted and abandoned. The realization unsettled him more than he liked. He had spent years controlling risk, but here, risk had found him anyway uninvited. His name carried weight. His presence attracted attention. Getting involved meant exposure. And yet, the longer he sat there, the heavier the silence became, pressing against his chest in a way money never had. He cracked the window slightly, letting rain-speckled air rush in, sharp and cold, cutting through the cocoon of leather and insulation. The smell hit him immediately, wet asphalt, blood, something metallic and wrong. It anchored the moment, stripped away abstraction. This wasn't a problem to outsource. This was a person. The thought landed hard, unexpected, forcing him to confront a truth he rarely considered. Some choices could not be delegated. He imagined driving on, rehearsing the justification, convincing himself it wasn't his responsibility. The image felt hollow. For the first time in years, his usual certainty wavered, replaced by a strange unease that refused to be ignored. His hand moved toward the door handle, then paused, hovering in the space between decision and retreat. He thought of headlines, of rumors, of the way stories twisted once they left the scene. He thought of how easily help could be misinterpreted, how quickly good intentions could become liabilities. This was Nigeria. Lagos never slept, never forgot. But beneath all that noise, one simple truth kept surfacing. If he left now, whatever happened next would happen because he chose not to intervene. The weight of that choice pressed harder than any deal he'd ever signed. Ethan opened the door and stepped out into the rain, shoes hitting wet pavement, water soaking into his cuffs immediately. The cold shocked his skin, grounding him fully in the moment. He moved slowly, cautiously, approaching the body as if sudden movements might shatter what little life remained. Up close, the damage was unmistakable. Bruises layered on bruises, blood smeared and diluted by rain. This wasn't an accident. It was an aftermath. He crouched slightly, heart beating faster now, counting breaths that barely came. The reality of her condition stripped away any remaining doubt. Leaving was no longer an option. He straightened, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, eyes scanning the empty road, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt. The city's distant glow framed them both. One man with everything, one woman with nothing left to lose. He reached for his phone, fingers steady despite the storm, already shifting from hesitation to action. Somewhere behind him, the car lights continued to burn bright, marking this place as no longer forgotten. And as he made the call that would pull others into this moment, one thought cut through the rain, sharp and irreversible. Whatever this choice led to, there would be no turning back now. White lights burst overhead as the hospital doors swung open, flooding the night with sterile brightness that felt almost violent after the rain. Nia's body moved fast now, lifted onto a gurney, wheels rattling across tiled floors slick with disinfectant. The smell hit first, sharp, clean, unforgiving, followed by the rhythmic beeping of machines that measured life in numbers and lines. Her clothes were cut away, without ceremony, fabric falling to the floor like evidence nobody wanted to examine too closely. Bruises bloomed under the lights, purple and yellow, telling a story no one had yet spoken aloud. Hands worked quickly, efficiently, with trained urgency. Somewhere behind them, Ethan followed, soaked and silent, watching strangers take over a responsibility that still felt firmly lodged in his chest. The emergency room hummed with controlled chaos, voices overlapping in clipped tones, shoes squeaking as staff moved with practiced speed. Nia's chest rose unevenly as oxygen masked her face, each assisted breath sounding louder than it should have. Her pulse flickered on a screen, unstable, fragile, a line that dipped too often for comfort. Doctors exchanged glances that carried more meaning than words, and suddenly the room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls were leaning in to listen. Ethan stood back, hands clenched at his sides, acutely aware of how little his wealth mattered here. He couldn't negotiate with a heartbeat.
He couldn't buy time.
All he could do was watch and wait, a position he despised more than he expected. Minutes stretched into something heavier than hours, marked by the steady tick of a clock and the relentless beep of monitors. Nia lay unmoving, skin pale under harsh light, eyelashes damp against her cheeks. Tubes and wires traced across her body, mapping pain and survival in equal measure. Somewhere down the corridor, a baby cried, sharp and alive, the sound cutting through the tension like a reminder of everything still at stake. Ethan leaned against the wall, the chill of it seeping through his clothes, grounding him in discomfort. His mind replayed the road, the hesitation, the choice to stop. If he'd been even a minute later, would this room be empty now? The thought refused to let go. A doctor finally stepped back, peeling off gloves with a tired exhale, eyes lingering on Nia's chart before lifting to meet Ethan's. The look said enough without explanation. This was bad. Very bad. Internal bleeding. Head trauma. A body pushed too far, too fast. They were doing everything they could, but certainty was a luxury no one here possessed. Ethan nodded, absorbing the words, though they landed like blows. He signed forms he barely read, consent given on behalf of someone who could not speak for herself. The weight of that responsibility pressed down, unfamiliar and sobering. He realized then that saving someone didn't end with stopping, it demanded staying. Night deepened outside the narrow hospital windows, Lagos glowing in distant clusters of light that felt impossibly far away. Nia's condition wavered, numbers on the screen dipping and climbing without warning, keeping everyone on edge. Nurses moved quietly now, voices low, as if sound itself might disturb the fragile balance holding her together. Ethan sat alone in a plastic chair, rain-damp clothes clinging uncomfortably, the reality of the situation settling in fully for the first time. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her life. Yet here he was, tethered to her fate by a decision made on instinct. The connection felt strange, unearned, but unbreakable. Silence wrapped around the room as visiting hours ended, leaving only the hum of machines and the occasional footstep in the hallway. Nia remained unconscious, caught somewhere between worlds, her body fighting a battle she couldn't narrate. Ethan watched her face closely now, searching for any sign, twitching fingers, a change in breath that might signal she was still there. The stillness was unnerving, a quiet that demanded patience he wasn't used to giving. He wondered what stories lay locked behind her closed eyes, what truth waited for the chance to surface. And he feared what would happen if she never woke to tell it. As dawn hinted at the edges of the sky, pale and uncertain, a nurse adjusted a monitor, frowning slightly at the readings. The line steadied, just enough to suggest possibility, not promise. Ethan leaned forward, hope stirring cautiously, afraid to trust it fully. Survival was not the same as recovery. Even if she lived, questions loomed about justice, about consequences, about who would answer for what had been done. The road had delivered her to him, but the path ahead was far less clear. And as the first light crept into the room, illuminating the fragile rise and fall of Nia's chest, one question hovered unresolved. Would waking up save her, or only pull her into an even more dangerous fight? Morning crept into the hospital with a false sense of calm, sunlight slipping through blinds and painting soft lines across the floor, as if nothing violent had happened in the hours before. The ward looked ordinary now, too ordinary. Nurses changed shifts. Doctors reviewed charts. Life resumed its rhythm. But beneath that surface, tension thickened, coiling tighter with every passing minute. Nia remained unconscious, her body quieter but no less fragile, and that quiet was dangerous. Silence created space. Space allowed questions to form, and questions once asked rarely stayed contained. Ethan's phone began to vibrate more often than usual, each call arriving with urgency he couldn't ignore. His driver, his assistant, a security consultant asking why his car had stopped for nearly an hour on an isolated road. He gave clipped answers, vague but careful, already aware that attention was circling. In Lagos, nothing involving power stayed invisible for long. Accidents became rumors. Rumors became stories. Stories grew teeth. He felt it now, the pull of consequences beginning to stir. Not from saving Nia, but from what saving her might expose. Down the corridor, a nurse paused longer than necessary at Nia's bed, eyes lingering on the bruises, the patterned marks that told their own story. This wasn't a hit and run. This wasn't a fall. Experience whispered what protocol did not say out loud. Notes were written more carefully. Observations became deliberate. A doctor adjusted her glasses, studying the injuries again, and frowned. Trauma like this carried fingerprints even when hands were long gone. The hospital, neutral as it pretended to be, had started asking its own quiet questions. Elsewhere in the city, panic took on a different shape, sharp and frantic, hidden behind closed doors.
Phones rang unanswered.
Messages stacked up. Someone replayed the night over and over, searching for reassurance that they'd done enough to erase her. Had anyone seen the car? The road? The trunk? Confidence began to crack under the weight of uncertainty. They told themselves she wouldn't survive. That even if she did, she wouldn't remember. But doubt has a way of slipping through the smallest cracks, and doubt had begun its work. Back at the hospital, Nia stirred for the first time, not fully awake, but enough to shift the air in the room. Her fingers twitched, nails grazing the sheet as if searching for something familiar. A faint sound escaped her throat, raw and unformed, and monitors reacted instantly, numbers jumping in response. Nurses moved in, quick and alert, calling for assistance. Ethan stood, heart pounding, hope and fear colliding violently in his chest. This movement, this tiny rebellion against silence, felt monumental. It meant the past wasn't buried yet. Fragments began to surface in Nia's mind, flashes without order, lights too bright, hands too heavy, voices sharp with accusation. Her body reacted before her memory could catch up, muscles tensing, breath hitching, heart racing against restraints meant to protect her. Doctors worked to calm her, to keep her anchored, but whatever lay beneath her closed eyes was already fighting its way upward. Pain had not erased everything. It had only scattered it. And scattered truths are often harder to contain. As she settled again, exhaustion pulling her back under, a quiet certainty settled over the room. This was no longer just about survival. The moment she spoke, if she spoke, the carefully built lies surrounding her would collapse. Ethan felt it deeply now, the shift from rescuer to witness, from chance intervention to unavoidable involvement. The road had delivered her body. The hospital was uncovering her story. And somewhere beyond these walls, people who believed themselves safe were beginning to understand a terrifying possibility. The secret they thought was buried might be waking up with her. The first mention of her name moved through the hospital like a spark, quiet but charged, passing from chart to clipboard to hushed conversation.
Nia.
A name simple enough to be overlooked, yet heavy with the weight of what it now represented. A nurse said it aloud while adjusting a drip, testing the sound as if it might change the air.
It did.
Names have power. They turn objects into people, cases into lives. Once spoken, Nia was no longer the woman from the road. She was someone, and that shift, small as it seemed, began to tilt the balance in ways no one could fully control. By midday, whispers leaked beyond the ward, carried by phones and passing conversations, nudged along by curiosity and unease. A battered woman found on an isolated road. Severe injuries. Possible assault. The details were incomplete, but the outline was enough to stir interest. In Lagos, stories traveled faster than traffic. They jumped across neighborhoods, crossed social lines, reshaped themselves with each retelling. Some voices sounded sympathetic. Others were skeptical, but all of them paid attention. Nia's existence was no longer contained within hospital walls. The city had begun to watch. Ethan felt the shift before he saw it, in the way people glanced a second longer, in the sudden politeness that followed recognition. His name carried its own gravity, and its proximity to hers changed the temperature of the room. Staff grew more formal. Questions sharpened. What had he seen? Where exactly had he stopped? The attention made him uneasy, not because he feared scrutiny, but because he understood its reach. Once a story connected to power, it rarely stayed simple. Yet even as he sensed complications ahead, he couldn't escape the feeling that visibility, dangerous as it was, might be the only thing protecting her now. Outside the hospital, the community began to react, slowly at first, then all at once. The same people who passed by suffering every day without stopping suddenly had opinions. Shock mingled with judgment. Pity wrestled with suspicion. Some asked why she'd been on that road at night. Others asked who could do such a thing and sleep afterward. The questions revealed more about the askers than about Nia. Still, something fundamental had changed. Silence had broken. And once broken, it could not be neatly restored. Nia drifted closer to consciousness as the noise around her grew, her body responding to the pull of the world reclaiming her. She didn't yet understand where she was or why her limbs felt foreign, but she sensed movement beyond her eyelids, voices, footsteps, urgency. Her name reached her through the fog, repeated gently, insistently. It anchored her, a thread pulling her back from the edge. She did not know that people were speaking about her already, that her pain had become a subject of discussion. All she knew was that she was no longer alone in the dark. Back at the house she had once cleaned in silence, tension curdled into fear, thick and restless. News traveled there too, distorted but unmistakable. A woman found alive. A billionaire involved. Hospital. Investigation. Every detail chipped away at the comfort of denial. Curtains were drawn. Phones went unanswered. Assurances repeated themselves until they sounded hollow. The certainty that she was gone, erased, had been their shield. Now it cracked, exposing what lay beneath. The possibility that she might speak transformed confidence into dread. As evening settled and the city buzzed with speculation, one truth stood firm. Nia's story was no longer hers alone to carry. It belonged to a watching world now, one that had ignored her before but could not look away anymore. The shift from anonymity to recognition was swift and unforgiving. Sympathy had begun to replace indifference. Curiosity had sharpened into scrutiny. And as her name echoed further than she ever imagined it would, a single, unsettling question followed it everywhere. What would happen when Nia finally told the whole truth? Uniformed footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor, steady and unmistakable, cutting through the usual rhythm of carts and hushed conversations. Authority had arrived, not loudly, but with intention. Clipboards were exchanged, notes reviewed, questions asked with care sharpened by purpose. What had once been treated as a medical emergency now carried the weight of something else entirely. The shift was subtle but absolute. This was no longer just about healing a body. It was about accounting for harm. Ethan watched from a distance as the machinery of consequence began to move, aware that once set in motion, it rarely stopped where anyone expected. Paperwork multiplied quickly, spreading across desks and screens, transforming Nia's injuries into documented facts that could not be ignored. Medical reports detailed patterns too precise to dismiss, timelines that refused to blur. Each line written tightened the net around whoever believed silence would protect them. Doctors spoke carefully now, their language deliberate, conscious of its future weight. Nurses who had seen too much to pretend otherwise shared observations quietly, truth slipping through professional restraint. The hospital, once a place of recovery alone, had become a ledger, and every entry leaned toward accountability. Nia's awareness sharpened in fragments, consciousness returning unevenly, like light through broken shutters. She felt the stiffness first, then the pain, then the weight of eyes watching, not predatory this time, but attentive. Hands adjusted pillows, offered water, explained gently where she was and why. The tone was different, respectful, cautious. She didn't have the strength to process it fully, but she sensed the change. For the first time in a long while, people waited for her response instead of speaking over her. That small shift, being waited for, carried a power she had never known. Beyond the hospital walls, influence began to fracture, the confident certainty of those who once controlled her life splintering under scrutiny. Phone calls went unanswered. Connections hesitated. Favors stalled. The quiet immunity they'd relied on thinned as questions crept closer to names and addresses. Power, it turned out, was only stable as long as no one challenged it. And now, the challenge had a pulse, a chart, a case number. Fear changed hands quickly, sliding away from the woman who had been beaten and settling instead in places long accustomed to safety. Ethan found himself navigating unfamiliar territory, not as a shield, but as a witness whose presence altered the balance. He refused to disappear quietly, refused to let the moment dissolve into convenience. His resources opened doors, but he used them sparingly, aware that too much force could twist perception. This wasn't about domination. It was about ensuring the truth had space to stand. Each careful decision reinforced the shift already underway, the recognition that power used responsibly could expose power abused. The community's reaction intensified as clarity replaced rumor, outrage swelling where indifference once lived. Voices that had dismissed her began to question themselves. Conversations changed tone. Sympathy grew teeth. The story no longer hovered in the abstract. It named actions, traced paths, demanded response. Social standing, once armor, felt suddenly fragile. The same structures that had enabled harm now trembled under the weight of attention they couldn't redirect. As night fell again, Nia lay awake, eyes open and focused, absorbing the unfamiliar reality forming around her. She did not yet speak. She did not yet accuse. But her silence was no longer weakness. It was anticipation. The world had moved closer, leaning in to hear what she would say when ready. And in that charged quiet, with authority shifting and fear redistributing itself, one truth became impossible to ignore. The balance had tipped, and those who once held all the power were no longer sure where it rested. The first apology arrived quietly, almost timidly, carried by a message that hovered on a screen before anyone dared to open it. Words that once would have been spoken with authority now felt cautious, rehearsed, stripped of certainty. Regret has a sound when it enters a room, soft, uneven, heavy with self-interest. Those who had once raised voices now lowered them. Those who had acted without fear now calculated every step. The confidence that fueled cruelty had drained away, replaced by the desperate hope that remorse might still bargain for mercy. Inside the house that once echoed with commands, silence settled thick and uneasy, pressing against walls polished to perfection. Familiar rooms felt smaller now, less secure, as if they were shrinking under the weight of memory. Objects that once symbolized control, keys, phones, doors, offered no comfort. Each corner whispered reminders of how easily power had been abused. Regret paced those halls restlessly, replaying moments that could not be undone. The past refused to stay quiet, knocking again and again, demanding to be answered. At the hospital, visitors began to ask for permission they never thought they'd need, voices careful, eyes searching for forgiveness before it was earned. Offers of help appeared suddenly, money, connections, explanations wrapped in concern. Nia watched from her bed, still weak but fully aware, noting how quickly fear reshaped behavior. The same people who once dismissed her now struggled to meet her gaze. Their kindness felt brittle, fragile, cracking under the weight of what they hoped it might erase. She said nothing, and in that silence, their regret grew louder. Sleep abandoned those who had once slept easily, replaced by restless nights and racing thoughts. Dreams replayed the road, the rain, the stillness of a body that should have moved. Morning brought no relief, only the stark awareness that consequences had begun their slow, relentless approach. Regret settled in deeply now, not the clean kind that leads to change, but the heavy kind born of fear. Fear of exposure, fear of loss, fear of standing on the other side of power for the first time. Ethan observed the shift with a distance sharpened by clarity, recognizing regret not as transformation, but as reaction. He understood its limits. True remorse did not arrive when danger appeared. It arrived when harm was first imagined. What he saw now was panic wearing the mask of humility. And still, even false regret carried consequences because it revealed cracks that could no longer be hidden. The truth had moved beyond private guilt. It had found momentum. Nia felt strength return in small but meaningful ways, enough to sit up, enough to hold a glass steady, enough to listen without shrinking. Each regained movement felt like a quiet reclaiming. Regret circled her, seeking acknowledgement, seeking relief. She offered neither. Her healing no longer depended on their recognition. For the first time, she understood that forgiveness was a choice, not an obligation. And that realization shifted something permanent inside her. As the weight of what they had done settled fully into reality, one truth became unavoidable. Regret could not reverse time, could not rewrite violence, could not silence justice, once awakened. The door they hoped to close had already been pushed wide open. And as they stood on the threshold, waiting for an answer that might never come, one question loomed with brutal clarity. Would regret be enough to save them now, Or had that chance passed the moment they chose cruelty over conscience? Morning returned to Lagos with a softer light than before, spilling through hospital windows and settling gently on Nia's bed, as if the city itself was trying to make amends. She sat upright now, thinner, bruised, but unmistakably present. The machines that once dominated the room had quieted, reduced to background reassurance. Each breath came easier. Each blink felt deliberate. Survival was no longer the question. Meaning was. The road that nearly ended her life had followed her here, not as a shadow, but as a turning point waiting to be understood. Outside, the wheels of justice moved with an unhurried certainty, slow enough to feel maddening, steady enough to feel inevitable. Statements were taken. Evidence aligned. Timelines refused to bend. What had once been hidden behind walls and power now existed in daylight, where excuses dissolved quickly. The city watched, not with a hunger for spectacle, but with something closer to reckoning. This was not gossip anymore. This was consequence. And it did not rush because it did not need to. Ethan stood at the edge of it all, changed in ways he hadn't anticipated, his wealth still intact but no longer central. He had not become a hero. He had simply refused to look away. That refusal had altered the trajectory of more than one life, his included. The certainty he once prized had given way to something quieter and heavier, responsibility. He understood now that power meant little unless it interrupted harm. The road had taught him that lesson without warning, and it had not let go. Nia spoke when she was ready, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a steadiness that commanded attention. Her words did not seek revenge. They sought truth. Each sentence reclaimed a piece of herself that had been taken. Each detail anchored the past, so it could no longer float free. The room held its breath as she spoke, aware that this was the moment everything pivoted on. When she finished, silence followed. Not the suffocating kind she once endured, but a respectful one that acknowledged what had been said could not be undone. The house she once cleaned faded into something smaller, stripped of its imagined invincibility. Walls remained, furniture remained, but the power that lived there had leaked away. What replaced it was accountability, sharp and unavoidable. For the first time, those who had dictated her worth faced a world that did not accept their version of events. The balance had shifted permanently, not because someone stronger had arrived, but because truth had stood its ground. Healing unfolded unevenly, day by day, marked by physical therapy sessions, quiet mornings, and moments of unexpected grief. Nia learned that survival did not erase pain, it reframed it. She did not return to who she was before. She became someone else entirely, a woman who knew her value, not because the world affirmed it, but because she had nearly lost it. Strength, she discovered, was not loud. It was persistent. The road remained where it always had, ordinary and unremarkable, cars passing over it without pause. To anyone else, it was just another stretch of asphalt. But for Nia, for Ethan, for everyone whose lives intersected there, it became something more. A reminder that fate does not announce itself. It waits quietly, disguised as a choice. And sometimes, justice begins not with a plan, not with power, but with a single moment when someone decides to stop. If you were the one that was humiliated in this video, and God being so kind later saved you from the hands of your enemies, what will be your reaction towards your oppressors? Comment and subscribe on this channel. Let us know your mind.